Great to have you here at OFM. We've come a very long way. It's been close to 2 decades since we met. And, you've always been someone that's quite fascinated me because you've got a deep passion for literature and arts and that. And this isn't necessarily where it all started for you. You were a teacher back in the day, a hostel parent down the road, worked in a little apartment, and you turned your passion into a career which is starting to flourish now. So where did this all start for this boy from Uppington?
Thanks, Morgan. Yes. Well, I've always been very fascinated with stories in particular. So, yes, it used to be more they call it the darker genres, like speculative fiction, dark fiction, horror books. I used to sneak out at night and watch scary movies. Well, not sneak out, but sneak out of bed. I think my parents knew eventually, but I was just very curious. And even back then, I knew there was someone behind the scenes. There were authors, there were directors, there were special effects people. And I always looked at the names, like at the end of the movies, like just the hundreds of people involved in everything. And eventually, when I started reading more and the passion to start like writing myself, but I combined that with the business side of it, because business comes, I don't want to say naturally to me, but just that combination of the creative side with the business side. And even the authors I work with, I want them to focus just on the creative, and then we'll manage the business stuff. So we fight with Amazon every day, and we fight with the printers and make sure, keep the headaches away from them, and they can just keep writing. I also help a few self-published authors because there's that combination, and we can teach them that. But yeah, for me, it just kept evolving, and when I was teaching, I knew this was not something I'd be able to do for the rest of my life. You just know when you're in the right career or not, and the teaching industry was changing so fast, and not in a good direction, but that's a story for another day. And I just kept hustling. So I had my day job, I had the normal teachers, sports and stuff in the afternoons, and then you go home and you put on another hat and you start working. And I started doing a few books, anthologies with other authors, just building a name, getting out there, meeting the right people, getting quality authors, artists, editors. And as money started coming in, I started hiring the jobs I wasn't that good at. And I kept learning new skills and just evolving myself, and then putting someone in charge. And then I start a new project and get someone in, train them to take over, and then I go on to the next project. And so it just kept growing and growing until basically 2012. I started the company. 2016, I was able to leave my job full time and just work from home. 2018, my little one was born, so I became a work-at-home dad, which was very difficult for 2 years, but we managed. And last year, we basically evolved from just a publishing company into an intellectual property company. So when we get stories now, we go through the entire line. So we look at comic books, board games, audiobooks, special edition hardcovers. We've got all kinds of projects coming out next year. Even a comic book graphic novel with New York Times bestseller. Remembering names is one of my worst aspects, but Jonathan Mayberry, yes. The Joe Ledger series is also being turned into a Netflix series from the producers of John Wick. So there's going to be a whole series of that, and we've got the comic book rights. So interesting times.
Absolutely. And your company, Crystal Lake Publishing, started with, as you mentioned, short novels and that, and it's just blossomed to where you guys are on the international stage now, because you did mention that your printing does get done abroad, which is probably a very smart move, because I can imagine how much politics is involved in it. But the reason why we've got you today is because you guys were representing at a convention in Frankfurt, Germany last week, and a very famous person happened to stumble upon this convention, and one of his favorite books is published by you guys. And this also brings to the point that social media is such a powerful tool in business and in keeping the arts alive, that this man reached out to you, and this just got a bit of a snowball effect going. And putting you guys on quite an interesting little adventure. And I dare mention this person we're speaking about is none other than Bob Dylan, the poet himself, a guy who's a lyrical genius, an actor, an author. So that must have been a massive deal just getting that mention from him on your social media accounts.
Yes, that was quite quite the thrill. Basically, I turn on my computer. First thing I do is I always check the messages from my staff, and normal message like, oh, remember we have to do this, and then the last one, you might want to check this out. And I'm like, okay. And it's an Irish author. He wrote the introduction to the book. So what we do is, there's so many great stories from like 100, 200 years ago that we call Crystal Classics. So Crystal Lake Publishing, and we call this series of books Crystal Classics, where really good stories. I mean, I'm talking not just H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, like some of the guys who were with them back then, Algernon Blackwood, Ambrosi Bierce. We take some of those amazing stories, we re-edit them, we put in new artwork, like interior artwork, new cover, introduction from some of today's authors, especially authors who were inspired by them. So this Scottish author, yes, the Irish one is another book. The Scottish author posted on Facebook that he saw Bob Dylan's tweet, and it's for the book that he wrote the introduction for. And I'm like Bob Dylan, like, let me just double check. And there's a photo, and the first thing, of course, you recognize is that little blue tick, just so you know it's the real deal. And we've also got it for our company, so I know what goes into it. But immediately I went to Twitter just to make sure, and it was his account, because there's already over 1 million views on that tweet, and just the number of followers he has, and he's not following anyone. The account was more than 10 years old, and just a quick search showed that since end of September he's taken out over his personal Twitter account, well, X, whatever, and immediately a lot of people verified that he was in Germany for 3 nights for a show. So he was in the same hotel where the Frankfurt Book Festival was being held, and the agency representing our books there, now this is basically for representing the books to other sellers, so translation deals, movies, stuff like that. And from what we understand is he stumbled upon the table where our books were, and he saw this book because immediately he saw our name, and so the tweet just basically said that he wanted to thank us. He was looking for us in the hotel, but he said he's never seen so many publishing houses in one hotel, and they were partying all night. And I can tell you, publishers and authors, if they take over a hotel, that's no wonder no one recognized Bob Dylan. So he tweeted that he was looking for us because he wanted to thank us, but also he has some stories that we might be interested in. So I think that was where the major, let's say, going viral state came in. And so I received a lot of notifications, emails, messages of people like saying Bob Dylan's looking for you. And then it went over to like our website emails. Of course, the sales of the book picked up because a lot of his fans wanted to read, because he said this is one of his favorite books. And I'm going to put that quote on the book and on the Amazon page of Bob Dylan saying this is one of his favorite books. So very interesting.
I must admit, I'm also a massive fan of Bob Dylan. I always have been. It's seriously up my alley when it comes to music, that genre. And I am so intrigued with this now, about this book that he said is his favorite book, that I literally sat and thought about it last night, is how have those sales gone up? Because I'm curious to read this book and find out what it's all about. What is this book called, and what is it all about?
This is Arthur Macken's The Great God Pan, which basically covers old Victorian story of a doctor who did some scientific tests. He believed that the human brain could be used to access the supernatural world, so that we can tune in and see the other side. So he did some experiments on a lady, which ended very badly. The whole idea where the pan comes in is, they call this process meeting Pan, like going to the other side, seeing him, and she went clinically insane. But the real story takes place much later, where she had a child, and wherever the daughter went, people mysteriously started dying. So I don't want to give away the ending, but It's quite, I don't want to say gruesome, but it's a horror story. For back then, I'm sure it was very shocking to people to read. So initially it wasn't well received, but today it's really a classic story.
Yeah, and it's probably just going to become even more of a classic story
yes.
going forward because of this attention that started getting all of a sudden. But now if a person looks at Bob Dylan, he has had such a varied career, known as a poet because, and something quite interesting you mentioned is that he likes using quotes of his favorite books and songs. But if he's got stories to tell, a person can only imagine what he could dream up or come up with. He's been through absolutely everything for the past 60, 70, 80 years, being 83 years old now. So a person can imagine things happening in the Vietnam War era and how he evolved. So that could be quite interesting what he can offer.
I'm very interested because, I mean, I've done some research on the history of not just literature, but especially the genres. I mean, I'm also writing non-fiction books where I teach authors and show them how language evolved, how stories evolved, how the stories we tell today, well, at any time reflects society of that time. So, I mean, like you said, the changes he's gone through, the events, global events, it changed the books that were written, the songs that were written, the way we see the world. And I'd like to see how even the stories from back to the 60s to what he would write today, for instance, how it's all changed for him. Could be amazing.
Yeah, and this man had such power back in the day during his music that he had the influence on people like Joan Baez, Jimi Hendrix. There are so many musicians even today that refer back to or have influenced by Bob Dylan and his creativity when it came to words.
Well, I still remember, I mean, even for me, the influence on me, back when we met, we were playing a bit of guitar, and that was one of the songs I learned first was, I think it was The Times Are Changing. And even today, I mean, that song is so relevant. So anything he writes, I think that's why the tweet also went so viral, is because everyone is interested to hear what he says. Journalists are just hanging on to his tweets and waiting for something. It's only about every 10 days, so hopefully my tweet's still going to be there for a few more days. And because that's why immediately after this happened, I started getting a lot of emails from journalists abroad, and people started sending articles of the tweet being dissected, and of course my company mentioned, which was the best thing possible. Even if nothing comes from this, publishing his stories or anything, just the press we've gotten, Rolling Stone magazine, GQ, a lot of literary magazines, Lit Up, stuff like that as well. And the Wall Street Journal reached out for an interview as well, which he has to submit this Friday to his editor, so I'm helping him answering questions via email quickly. So very, very interesting.
Yeah, and like we discussed a little bit earlier, is that Bob Dylan's very cryptic in the way he says stuff, because he is such a genius with words. So something might come out of it, something might not come out of it, but what does it mean for a South African company to be recognized by this guy that's got over 1 million followers on X? And, there's that old saying, 7 people, where seven people tell 7 people, and it can just absolutely turn into something monstrous from there.
A lot of the replies to the tweet actually was from our existing list of authors, is now they're only 1 degree away from Bob Dylan, and instead of the normal 5 to 7 degrees of separation. So yes, it's wonderful, and like I said, whatever comes from this, I'm super happy. And it sounds weird, but I've always expected something big to happen. I've always aimed for it. I've built the foundation, and I actually joked and said it's about time someone big recognizes the company, because we've done so much in the international scene. Locally, I've actually been hiding away, just working the whole time, but that's going to change. We're going to do some more local productions here in Bloemfontein, and the world can see how amazing artists and authors in South Africa are.
And Joe, just finally, you also started out as an author yourself. You have published your own books. Is there a new book coming from the pen of Joe Mynhardt in the pipeline?
For me personally, the first book was a tester. I didn't want to make a mistake on someone else's work. So I wrote the stories, I published the book, I studied the effects, I studied the reviews and just the whole process before I took on someone else's work. So the moment we had about 10 books published, we're now well past 200. I took that book down, so I don't want it to look like a whole self-publishing vanity type thing. So it's all business now. The books that I do write at the moment, because I had to write a lot of copy editing, so a lot of the back page stuff, the descriptions for the books, marketing copy, stuff like that. And over the years I've learned so much, and I'm still a teacher by nature, so it comes easy for me to want to teach other people what I've learned. And a lot of people help me along the way, so I have to do the same. So I do a lot of workshops. I've got a mastermind group that meets every second weekend online. And so the 2 books I wrote were all non-fiction, focused on marketing, branding, the writing itself, the history of the genre that the author chooses, and basically just how to become. And being an author these days is a business. It's a career. It's not just one book at a time. You are the product. The author is the product. So you need a brand. You're basically a small business on your own. And that's what I can teach them. Because I've done it, I've been there, and I'm still doing it, and quite successfully.
Fantastic. Let's hope someone like Stephen King picks up on this tweet as well and reaches out, because he's also getting a little bit long in the tooth. Yes. Joe, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best with this venture, and I hope it really pans out for you to put your company on the map as well as our wonderful country.
Thanks, Morgan.
OFM News, in touch with your world.